take them out if you can. Paper. You don't need light. Your work funds.
Oh, Michael. John.
Hello there.
You've been hiding out down there in the southern part of Orange County. I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah. How you doing?
Okay.
Hi, John. This is Kara.
Hi, Carly. You too. I haven't seen you either for a while.
No, you haven't.
Right.
It's good. We got all the regulars back together again. It's a reunion.
Yeah, Kate. Good idea.
All right. I think it's well, they keep coming in. All right, we'll just start now, and I'll keep watching the box. Good evening, I'm Kate Schmidt. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for Orange County, as well as a Land Use Planner in the Orange County Department of Planning. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have many wonderful speakers, but first let's get to the business. For the sake of all, please mute your devices, and there will be a Q&A. An interactive Q&A after our speakers are finished. So we will open the floor to comments, but alternatively, feel free to use the chat box as we go along, and I'll try and get you a quicker answer. Also, please share any relevant links or your contact info in the chat box. It's a great tool. So let's use it as an exchange of information and thoughts, please. Email me if you need credits for this class, please. And yes, you can earn credits for your attendance here, as well as the classes that are on the screen. This is our 5th class of March Madness, and we have 3 more going into April. So if anyone wants to join us, then you can get credits tonight as well as next week. I want to apologize to anyone who has been bothered by our email system. It's getting better, I think. John Geberts, is it getting better?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Thank you, Kate.
He was a big victim. The system picked on a few. Everyone else was fine that I thought of. John just kept saying, why do I need a password to open this? So hopefully we're working that out. We did work out the kinks, and we're able to get the last 3, soon to be 4 tomorrow, recordings on our website. And that is orangecountygov.com sustainability. And I'll put that into the chat once I'm done here. But this session is being recorded, as well as all the others, and they will live on orangecountygov.com/sustainability website. So will the slides as well as the recordings. So welcome. And let's talk about a great lineup of speakers presenting for this very important topic tonight. I know you will walk away educated, but I hope you are also inspired. You will learn a lot about a New York State-wide bill that has failed to get traction for over a decade, and we need to change that now, this year. Leaving the details to the speakers, I will say that in order for a community to initiate open space preservation, a municipal generated natural resources inventory, or better known as an NRI, would be a really good place to start. From there, you could develop your community preservation plan that identifies valuable parcels worthy of preservation. Municipalities also need volunteers to champion this cause. You will see here about, you will hear this all from an amazing volunteer tonight. And these volunteers educate the community, research the parcels, and keep the process moving, because it could stop in a moment's notice. County planning is hopeful we can also help you with the most important element, the maps. The maps that demonstrate a municipality's natural resources. Because we are so currently understaffed, we may need some lead time to get that going. But we also need to know that their municipality has a dedicated committee ready to review and ground truth our maps. Sometimes this group can be a municipality's CAC or Conservation Advisory Council, or an ERB, Environmental Review Board, or an EMC, Environmental Management Council. There's so many different acronyms to describe a group of active people who want to get some good things done, conservation minded. It could also be a team of new volunteers. If your municipality does not have a CAC, this would be a great time to get one started. A CAC is a municipal board whose main charge is to typically review land use development proposals in conjunction with the municipal planning board. But this same group of dedicated volunteers can champion other items such as stream monitoring, wetland identification, water protection, tree plantings, and other worthwhile efforts. For example, the Montgomery CAC was instrumental in saving a farm from development and instead created a thriving public park named Benedict Field right off Albany Post Road. Recently, these conservation-minded groups are broadening their scope to take on state sustainability challenges that could include recycling, composting, energy audits, waste audits, LED lighting, energy efficient upgrades, municipal comprehensive plans that include sustainability plans, that include energy plans, vulnerability assessments, clean energy initiatives, electric vehicle charging stations, and even local laws that could require all new construction include geothermal heating and cooling systems and mandatory photovoltaic or solar systems on their new roofs or commercial parking lots. And this is just a short list of a few of many potential action items that can be awarded New York State sustainability points, which can lead to access to grants and even straight up cash from the Climate Smart Community Program, also known as CSC, and the Clean Energy Program, also known as CEC. Many of you have heard about this. If you need more information, please reach out to me. And I don't want to stray away from tonight's topic, but if you do need details also on a CAC, starting one of those in your community, contact me. I'll put my name, the website, and my email in the chat so you can get the recordings and talk to me. So let's get started with the Community Preservation Act. I think we've given people enough time to get on board. Tonight, we're going to start off with Warwick Town Supervisor Mike Sweeten. Michael holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Clarkston University and obtained an MBA in Marketing from Manhattan College. After working in the chemical industry for 6 years, Michael joined the family business in the field of horticulture as general manager for Technigrowers, a consulting, wholesale, and retail business, until running for town supervisor in 2001, a post which he has held since. He also serves, very importantly, as the president of the Orange County Association of Towns, Villages, and Cities. He's also a member of the Orange County Planning Board and the Orange County Transportation Council Executive Board. Michael, working with community groups and the town board, concluded a successful campaign to become the 6th town in New York State to have this real estate transfer tax for preservation in 2006. And he's going to tell us about that tonight. So he was the sixth one. Long Island really formed many of them, and they'll talk about that. But Neil Betez is the current supervisor of the town of New Paltz, and he's the most recent one to the party. He's responsible for fiscal and managerial oversight of day-to-day operations in the town, ranging from community outreach to coordination with local and statewide agencies. He's also a visiting scientist at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies and holds a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from Cornell University. He is author or co-author of more than 40 peer-reviewed papers and sits on the board of the nonprofit Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. Great group with a beautiful website. Fracaroli, that active volunteer I referenced before, enjoyed a 40-year career in conservation in the Hudson Valley as staff with both Scenic Hudson and the Nature Conservancy, so she knows her stuff. In 2020, she co-chaired the Community Preservation Plan Task Force for the town of New Paltz and subsequently worked with campaign committee to put the Community Preservation Fund, referendum before the New Paltz voters, which passed with a wide margin. Lee is now serving as the chair of the 7-member New Paltz Community Preservation Fund Advisory Board. And last, but certainly not least, Carly Fracaroli is a state policy coordinator for Scenic Hudson. She works with stakeholders from local organizations to state legislators. She was up in Albany yesterday, thank you very much, to make sure that policies are in place to support a wide range of initiatives throughout the Hudson Valley and beyond, including climate resilient farming, Hudson River access, and conservation finance. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science and Sustainability from Cornell University. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us. Please use that chat box. And with that, please take it away, Supervisor Sweeten.
Okay, we're going to switch for the,
Yes, you are. I stopped it, but there we go. Great.
okay, good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here and share some of these stories, and we hope that it's helpful. So we'll go to the next slide. For those of you not familiar with Warwick, we're in the southwestern portion of Orange County. We are the largest town in Orange County, which can be a challenge, but also was a benefit in our efforts, I believe. Agriculture still is our largest industry. We have about 8,000 acres of black dirt, and then probably another 8,000 acres of upland farm in Warwick. And it's pretty diversified at this point. There is still some dairy, beef cattle, goats, hay, orchards. We have a lot of U-pick. The muckland is famous for lots of good stuff. If you've never been there, you should visit it. It's pretty awesome. And then we've been tried to be a very farm-friendly community, so we've given our farmers lots of opportunities to diversify, and they have. They're very creative and dedicated, and they've been able to do it. So next slide, please. I like this picture. I usually put it up because it shows what you can accomplish. And even though it's seasonally a little different and from a different angle, it's essentially the same shot of the valley. And you see that it's not overrun with homes, and it pretty much looks like it did in 1969. And that's a tribute to a lot of people that worked really hard. So it's a good inspiration, I would say, to what you can accomplish when you get to it. So next slide. Again, so what are your options to preserve land, right, in your community? You can use zoning, and it's upzoning, so more acres per lot. That's wasteful. It really just eats up the land faster. And it is fairly contentious because the large landowners, which is the land you're trying to preserve, are the ones who feel most pressed on by that effort. You could get donations from landowners. That used to happen years ago. I'm not sure it happens much anymore. Taxation, so your town boards could either just through general taxation put money aside for preservation, or they could float a bond. And then your last choice is a real estate transfer tax. Unfortunately for us, only New York State, the legislature and the governor can impose a tax in New York. So you have to go to them and get permission. That's what this is all about. Next slide. So back in the 90s, Warwick residents, we had a lot of many farms. Warwick residents were concerned about growth, what was happening. Farmland was identified as the most important aspect of Warwick at the time, and volunteers got together with the town board, convinced them that they needed to preserve land using a technique at the time called purchase of development rights, and convinced the board to put a referendum out for $9.5 million bond borrowing on the taxpayers to preserve farmland. They did it, put it out there. At the same time, they did a build out analysis to show what the town would look like if it built out under its current zoning. It was pretty scary. So the board proposed upzoning. It was contentious, as I mentioned. I was running that year. I worked with the board, and we introduced cluster zoning, which at the time was sort of controversial. Now everybody does it because it makes sense, where you put the developed portions on very small portions of the land and you keep the rest open. And they got to the 11th hour and couldn't pass it. 3 of them were leaving. I got elected with my folks, and we passed the zoning in the first month that I was elected. And we tried to launch the purchase development rights. But as you can imagine, because the zoning was contentious, the candidates for preservation were absolutely opposed to it. And next slide. Part of the issue was that the volunteers had the idea to follow the state at the time, which was giving you 75% and looking for a 25% donation. That didn't sit well with the farmers. I mean, they felt that was their land was their 401ks, and they didn't really feel like giving 25% of it away. So my board committed to paying 100% of the development rights. Plus, we said we would pay, if you get the closing, survey costs, title costs, everything except the applicant's attorney's cost. At that point, that just kind of opened the floodgates. Some of the well-known farms in the town approached us and said, we're very interested, and we were off and running. So in that, from about 2003 to 4, we were getting inundated with applications, and we realized that $9.5 million wasn't going very far. And so if you've ever sat on a board and gone to the voters to say, I want to tax you more, they don't really like that. So it didn't seem like an option to go back to them and say, we need another $9.5 million. So we said, what do we do? Next slide. We learned about the effort of the 5 towns on the east end of Long Island. They had imposed a real estate transfer tax. So we contacted them. They were extremely helpful. Trust for Public Land at the time also was very helpful because they were involved in that effort. And they said, here's what you have to do. And they gave us their legislation. And we said, well, shoot, if the state let it happen there, what excuse would they have for not letting it happen anywhere else? And we were a bit naive. We didn't know how it worked in Albany, really. And we got a lesson. So the process is, of course, you have to have a home rule request if you want to impose it in your community. You got to get your senator and assemblyman to carry that. They pretty much have to carry a home rule request. So that's not so much of a hurdle. But then it gets introduced. And we learned about the committee process in Albany. And we went up to Albany a bunch of times. And we would go to the Senate and they would say, yeah, we're good here, but you got to go to the Assembly. We'd go to the Assembly and they'd say, okay, you're good here, but it's really the Senate you have a problem in. And so after bouncing around a bunch of times, we began to get a little smarter. If it gets through the committee process, it goes to the floor, it gets voted on, and it goes to the governor. You do need the governor to sign it. We learned in Orange County last year, one town, Blooming Grove, had got all the way to the governor, and in the 11th hour, Governor Hochul vetoed it with not any real good reason. Not to pick on the governor, but she rejected it. It took us several years to get from 2000 and I would say 3 or 2.5, 3 to getting it onto the floor, passed in 2006, and Governor Pataki actually signed it for us, and we were off and running. So next slide. So once you get that, right, you go through all that process. You have to schedule a referendum because this is the transfer tax authorization does not impose a tax. And this is an argument sometimes you hear from legislative people. Well, we don't like taxes. We don't impose taxes. They're not imposing a tax. You are required by the law to go to your voters in a referendum. It is your voters who decide. And I always tell people what's more democratic than having the people decide the issue, right? So you have to schedule that referendum. You have to prepare a community preservation plan. And my friends from New Paltz are going to run you through the nuts and bolts of all this, but I'll give you the high level view. That looks at your community and says, we're going to sort through and figure out all the parcels in our town and our community that we'd love to preserve and protect for various reasons. Could be farmland, which was our focus, could be water resources, environmental critical areas, recreation areas, historic structures, whole bunch of things. And you actually put them in a plan, you have to show a map with it, and you have to have a hearing on that. And then once that hearing's over, your board has to adopt it. It's critical in that plan that at least initially, most of the legislation says you can't amend it for the first 3 years. So you can't expend any transfer tax money on a parcel if it's not in the plan. You can add to a plan after the 3 years, but that first 3 years may be critical to you. Next slide. Once you schedule that referendum and you get your plan in place, you got to mount a campaign because there will be people who don't like this. And we can talk about some of those. We did that with a group of volunteers, again, members of our conservation board and just volunteers. And I said, we're the biggest town. We're a very diverse town. We have areas of the town that have no farms, and yet they valued water resource protection. So you bring all these people together, and you'll see examples later. But we did mailers, testimonials. We went out, spoke to anybody that would listen to us. We had bumper stickers, signs. So who opposes this? Well, realtors hate it. Just a gut reaction. The State Realtor Association, they don't like it. They think it's an assault on their industry. You'll get other groups that are pro-development per se, and they will oppose it. We didn't really get the brutal effort that the New York State Realtors did in Long Island when we did it, but we had local realtors come out against it, some builders come out against it. And next slide. It went to the voters in November 2006. As I said, it passed by 55% to 45%. So you could see it was, people had mixed emotions about it. Went into effect in 2007, and it sunsets 20 years later, so 2026. That's the legislation. We took Long Island's and used it exactly because we didn't want the state people to have an argument that it was different. And the only difference in ours was that our tax was 0.75%, with some exceptions, 50,000 for raw land, 100,000 for land that's developed. We went to that number from 2%, which is sort of the norm, at the advice of a senator, that it would make it easier to get it through. And the year that we made the change, it didn't go through. So, you do what you can do, but that works for our community, and it was fine, and it's still fine. And as you see, it has generated to date $13 million+ for the program. Farmers, I'm still working on currently 4 farms to come into the program. That much longer, since the bill has been in place. And I do want to point out that we went back to this process just 2 years ago, actually, with Senator Metzger and Assemblyman Brabennick. They were our representatives, and we could not get it out of the assembly at the time. The council office held it up for, again, unknown reasons. Their excuse was, well, you don't sunset to 2026, so you have plenty of time. And our argument was, okay, but we can't commit long-term to farms if we don't know that we have the resource to do that, right? We can't put that burden on the taxpayer. This past session, Senator Martucci was our senator. Assemblyman Brabennick again carried it, got it in. I reached out across the aisle to Assemblywoman Gunther, and we were able to get it through. And Governor Cuomo, whatever anyone thinks of him, God bless him, signed it on his last day in office. So now our fund extends to 2050, which gives us a lot of flexibility to continue to preserve parcels. We've used 7.3 million of it. We've leveraged that with an additional 6.7 that come from federal, state, and other land trust dollars to preserve 1,860 acres. And total with our bond referendum, we've preserved about 4,400 acres in the town. So we're pretty happy with that. Next slide, please. And I'd just like to show this. It doesn't really see, but that's 3 different plaques that hang in our town hall with every farm on it that we've preserved. And it's nice to look over to see that. And I think there's about 43 farms on it currently. And again, we're processing 4 right now. Next slide. So, you know, how do you do it in your own town? So outside of the statewide authority, which I want to talk to you about in just a second, you have to seek and have passed in the legislature your home rule bill to impose the tax, and the governor has to sign it. You have to hold the mandatory referendum to enact the law. You have to prepare the plan. A statewide bill is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. And it's so important, and you need to reach out to your legislators. You know, we did our extension and at the time, the original bill with 2 Republicans, and they were able to work it. So it's not a partisan thing. It doesn't have to be a partisan thing. They're able to get it through with a lot of hard work. So I encourage anybody on this call, please reach out to your state representatives and say, please support the statewide bill, because it'll give you still have a lot of work, and you can, they're not imposing a tax. Make that up front with them. It is a tax, but they're not imposing it. Your voters are choosing to do it. The buyer coming into your community pays that tax. And for your residents, they've already paid for new firehouses, new schools, new ambulances. So they've made the contribution to make their community a really special place. And people want to come to those places. They want to come. I've had people who paid our transfer tax meet me somewhere and say, oh, you're the guys that imposed this. And I say, yeah. And they said, well, we get it. We understand it. That's why we're here. So, and don't listen to the people that say, you know, it's going to ruin home values. People aren't going to be able to want to come here. That's not true. Land values go up. Realtors now in Warwick, first thing they do is run by one of the farms that has a nice sign out that says preserved farm. And they use it to sell additional houses. So it's a balance in your community, and you need a balance. You need to protect your resources, because if you don't, those new developers that want to come in aren't going to have any, they're not going to have any resources. So you have to balance it. And this is the way to do it. So I urge you and encourage you to reach out and touch a legislator. And that's it. So my contact information is there, and we'll be here for a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Neil, are you ready? You're muted. Neil, you're still muted. And thank you for doing that.
Sure. You'll see my kids running in here soon. I can get through this before then. But so, you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with New Paltz, maybe you didn't read, you know, we're just in the New York Times or in there kind of every now and then. You know, we're a little bit smaller than Warwick. We're only 34 square miles. We have a population of about 14,000. Of that 14,000, about half live in the village and half in the town outside of the village. Interestingly enough, I'll talk more about it later, but I went back and looked at some of the trends in preparation for this talk. It's been that way since about 1960. And so right now, a lot of people are worried about everyone moving up here from New York City because of COVID and how that's going to change everything. We have all this development pressure. But as you all know, this worry about development pressure isn't new. It's something that should have been an issue for a long time in every town that's seen big changes due to development. This isn't due to COVID. What's really driving these changes? So over the last 50 years, the population in New Paltz has only increased by about 3,500 people. Half of that increase has been in the village, where no one is saying, oh my God, development is going to change everything, right? So development is actually encouraged in the village. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a net increase of about 1,750 people in town outside of the village. That has resulted in huge changes in the amount of open space in town. I'm sure this is not unique to New Paltz. This type of development is happening everywhere. And this is why we're talking about this tonight. So if such a small increase in population has such a large impact on the character of your town, what you're doing is not sustainable in the long term. You know, that Supervisor Sweeten alluded to this, but many towns, New Paltz included, has tried to preserve open space by requiring larger lots. Or, you know, we do some cluster zoning too, that helps. But this doesn't really work. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Take a look at your town, extrapolate out what will happen as population increases. It's not sustainable. You know, so the cost to the character of your town as well as the environment is huge. But that's not even the worst of it. You know, for one house on a 5-acre lot, you now have to plow a lot more roadway. So your costs go up. Eventually, you're going to have to replace that road, and then all the money that you made from taxes from that house, they're gone in one job. So in addition to costing more, costing less to maintain, open space has a lot of other benefits. Makes your place, a town, a desirable place to live. Increases home values, as the supervisor mentioned. You don't have to preserve it all. You know, people need to live and work and shop somewhere, as we've already talked about. But, you know, so you can make your downtown dense. You know, in New Paltz, we preserved 100 acres on the edge of the village, creating an urban park. We can also walk or ride from the village up to Mohonk or Minnewaska, if you've heard of them, on the River to Ridge Trail, which is a trail built by the Open Space Institute on land that they helped preserve. There are a lot of environmental benefits, but I just want to focus on a few that benefit municipalities. So open space is much better for flood control. It's going to increase air quality, but most importantly, drinking water. I mean, look at what New York City's done with the Catskill reservoirs. It's a lot cheaper to protect land where your water comes from than to clean it up after. You know, assuming you even know what you're trying to get out of it when you clean it up. You know, we're just learning about emerging contaminants like PFAS now, after we've probably been drinking those for years. But if your water's coming from a place with protected land, you don't have to worry about it. So it's always better to avoid the problem than to fix it afterwards. It's going to be cheaper and you're going to be better off. That's really all I have to say. I'd like to now hand it over to Kara, and she can talk about, you know, our project. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with Neil and the rest of the panel to talk about community preservation funds. And Neil mentioned that, you know, New Paltz has become quite a magnet for people coming up from the city. At the time that we were working on our referendum, this article appeared in the New York Times and giving all the reasons that people would want to move to New Paltz. So our campaign was very timely because our community was beginning to feel like we were a bit of a focal point. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it takes to have a community go through the process of establishing a community preservation fund. And Mike Sweeten talked about the process if in fact you do not have authorization to impose a real estate transfer tax. And I just want to make the point that in 2007, the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act made it possible for a number of communities in the Hudson Valley to impose a real estate transfer tax. Ulster County was not part of that act. But in 2019, Senator Jen Metzger took the lead on getting Ulster County included, which made it possible for New Paltz to move forward with establishing a CPF without going directly to the legislature in the manner that Supervisor Sweeten described. So that's just his background. The things that are important to get a CPF off the ground is, first of all, very important to have a receptive town board and having Neil actively involved supporting this as the supervisor was really key. And of course, you have to engage the public who are ultimately going to vote for it. We already heard that you have to have a community preservation plan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what goes into the plan and how you pull that together. You actually have to adopt 3 local laws in order to achieve your goal of having a community preservation fund, because once you have the plan, you have to have a local law to adopt it. You have to have a local law to create your fund and establish the real estate transfer tax. So again, it's really important that your town board is well informed about what it is you're striving to achieve and is there to support you in getting these laws passed. And finally, once you've done all of that, this has to go before the public in a referendum on election day, so that it's the voters in your community have the chance to weigh in. And I probably should have put resources at the top of the list instead of the bottom of the list. And the most important resources of all are the volunteers who work on developing the community preservation plan, who lend their support to getting the laws passed, and ultimately then manage the campaign to educate the public about the referendum. You may need other resources. You may need a planner to help you develop your community preservation plan. You may need funding to do materials to inform the public about the referendum. But I would say the most important thing is having an active body of volunteers who work on all these different pieces. Next, please. So we put together a community preservation task force, and it was made up of members of our Environmental Commission, our Historic Preservation Commission, and other interested members of the community. And one of the first things that our task force did was to develop a small survey, but it was a way of informing the public in New Paltz that we were focusing as a community on conservation. So we did an online survey. We created the questions. I think there were 10 or 12 questions to ask people about what they valued most in the community in terms of natural resources. And our goal was to learn about what were the priorities for the public in terms of preservation. And we mailed postcards to inform people about the opportunity to participate in the survey, but we also advertised it on social media, the town website, and perhaps also in the newspaper, I believe. We ran the survey for 5 weeks. We were thrilled to have 506 people respond. And it gave us some really good information about what people thought was most important. We had an open-ended question where people could write in, and we got dozens of wonderful testimonials from people about what they thought was important in terms of community character in New Paltz and natural resources that they cared about. So it was a great way to pull our committee together, get us thinking about what we were going to focus on, and to engage the public. Next, please. So when you're putting together your plan, the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act actually lays out quite a bit of detail what needs to go into the plan. And it's a place to articulate the intention of the community in terms of what it is they're trying to preserve. But it also requires an analysis of the natural resources in the community and a look at the parcels in your community that you would want to protect. And you would think that you might approach that by identifying a small number of priorities and a small number of parcels. But in fact, what you want to do is cast a fairly broad net that covers all the parcels you might possibly want to protect, because if they're not in the plan, you can't use CPF funds to protect those parcels. So we cast our net broadly. We included most of the parcels in town. We excluded parcels that were already built out. But with the exception of those, we did most of the parcels in town. The plan also is required to review your existing code, which protects resources, so that you're in a position to use that analysis when you're looking at a parcel to decide whether, in fact, it's already protected by, let's say, your wetlands law or your steep slopes law or your floodplain law, so that you're not spending dollars on something that's already protected by the code. Next, please. So in New Paltz, a lot of work had already been done to identify priorities. And this is probably true in your community as well. You may not have this exact same list, but we had, of course, our comprehensive plan. We had done an open space inventory and an open space plan, a farmland preservation plan, historic resources. And we had an inventory of open space areas, although we had not yet completed our natural resource inventory, which we have now completed. But all of these things are things that people had already supported in our community and were the resources that we turned to as we put together our community preservation plan. And a lot of this was data that was in maps. Some of these plans had maps, some of them didn't, but for the purposes of our community preservation plan, we did go to a GIS based system, a geographic information system, which is what you would do also with a natural resource inventory. So if your community has a natural resource inventory, you've already put your data into that kind of a format, which is very, very useful for creating your community preservation plan. Next, please. So in terms of priorities, we identified, I kind of think of them as themes of the kinds of resources that we would want to protect in the community. And of course, if you look at this list, water resources, farmland, habitat, historic resources, recreational land, scenic resources, and also other open space areas that had been identified in our 2006 open space plan. This pretty well covers the things you're going to want to protect. They're broad categories, but they help guide what you're going to look at. Next, please. So I'm going to use the example of water resource priorities. What does that mean? Well, we had mapped information for these different types of water resources. So our reservoirs, where our aquifers are, floodplains, wetlands, and other criteria. And when these attributes are present, they are given a point in our plan so that you come up with a score in the theme or priority of water that helps you evaluate where you have parcels that have these attributes. Next, please. So we went through this process with all of the categories, all of the priorities, and each one of them, you know, has multiple data layers in the geographic information system in the GIS, but we can overlay those and see how attributes stack up on any given parcel so that that parcel has a score. And that enables us then to begin to compare the relative values of parcels from a resource protection perspective. So next, please. We ended up with over 1,500 parcels that were identified as containing priority resources. And the scores range from 1 to 23 points. And the 23 points would indicate to you that that parcel has lots of different attributes that are considered important by our community preservation plan. So even if you were not to take your plan to the next step of creating a fund and having a referendum and so on, the plan is a fantastic decision support tool for your community that could be used by the planning board, the historic resources board, whoever in your town is looking after resources can make use of this plan. But it is what is necessary to prioritize eligible parcels under the Community Preservation Fund program. Next, please. So the law, the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Law, lays out how the funds can be expended or for what types of projects. And this is the list directly out of the law. And I'm not going to read through the list, but I think it gives you a good sense of the kinds of things that can be, that community preservation funds can be used for. And I guess I would just make the distinction that you can see that this isn't for ball fields or swimming pools or other kinds of perhaps outdoor things. This really revolves around protection of natural resources. And I have over there in that little box, that 10% of the fund can be used for stewardship on lands that have been protected with CPF funds. So that kind of stewardship might be building a trail or addressing erosion or monitoring of conservation easements, which is an important, responsibility. Next, please. And then the law also addresses how the land should be managed, and it has to be publicly accessible and used by the public. The intent is to preserve natural biological diversity. And it specifies that trails are great, peripheral parking is necessary, but that, that has to be a balanced effort so that it is not deleterious to the biological resources. It's possible to use the funds to preserve cultural properties. We've been trying to explore that in New Paltz about how to go about that, and we have not quite got that figured out, but we're working on it. We will engage with primarily the Wallkill Valley Land Trust to help us with our program, and specifically we will engage them to monitor conservation easements when we have some in place. And finally, lands purchased with CPF funds can't be sold, leased, exchanged, donated, or otherwise disposed of. So that probably you're familiar with the concept of alienation of parkland. You can't alienate these lands without approval from the state legislature. Next, please. So Mike talked about this and Neil as well. We had a bond also that we passed in 2006. Every time you use bond funds, it costs your taxpayers, and that became much less feasible when the tax cap went into place. So this is an alternative to the bond model and is more sustainable. You've already heard that it's a one-time tax and it's paid by the buyer of a property in your community. In New Paltz, the law allows up to 2%. In New Paltz, we decided to go with 1.5%. There is an exemption for people at the low end of the market. The exemption that was set was $245,000, and that's determined by the state, but based on the county median house price or property price. So you don't really have a lot of latitude in how the exemption is set, but you have some latitude as to what the percentage would be. And we ran a model that helped us look at past sales in New Paltz And we were able to estimate that it would generate about $180,000 in revenue annually to go to the dedicated community preservation fund. Next, please. So this is a little table that helps people understand what the tax implication would be for a person buying a property in New Paltz. And at the top, it shows that the exemption is the amount we just discussed at a 1.5% rate. So if you were buying a property and the property value is on the left that was $245,000 or less, you wouldn't pay any tax. At $300,000, you would be taxed on $55,000, which is the difference between $300,000 and $245,000. So you would be paying a tax of $825. And that's how this little table works. And it shows you how the tax would progress with the increased value of the properties. And so the intention is, again, to help people who are at the low end of the market or first-time home buyers, you know, so that the tax doesn't fall too heavily on them. Next, please. Another question we get now frequently is whether the tax applies to all types of properties. So commercial properties or vacant land or homes. And it does apply to all properties, but you can see from this diagram that the bulk of the revenue comes from the sale of single family homes. Next, please. So these are things, these little takeaways, I think are things we've now heard a few times, that a real estate transfer tax is a sustainable source of revenue. And it's good to remind people that it benefits the whole community and that residents of your community are not experiencing an increased property tax. We have pretty high property taxes in the Hudson Valley. People are concerned about their property taxes. And it's important to make the distinction that this is not an increase in their property tax. And we've already talked about who the exemption benefits. The exemption is reevaluated every year in April. And our exemption went up last April from $245,000 to $280,000 because home prices in Ulster County had jumped quite significantly. And again, I think Neil and Mike both talked about the fact that this program protects the qualities in the community that attract buyers to your community. And the realtors seem slow on the uptake on this one, but it really enhances their business, not detracts from it. Next, please. So once you've got your wonderful plan in place and the local laws have been passed to adopt it, then it's time to move into campaign mode. And your committee that's been working on this then turns into a campaign committee. And it's just like, you know, how running a candidate for public office, you have to register with the Board of Elections. You have to keep track of every penny that you spend on your campaign so you can report it. And it's really an education campaign to reach the public and inform them about the benefits of this to the community, to dispel concerns and fears that people might have about it, and to use, you know, every means you have to get the word out and to build support with people who are thought leaders in your community, people who read the newspaper. You want old timers, you want newcomers, you want everybody to support it as you work towards election day. And one of the things that we did with our committee, we had a graphic designer on our committee who helped us design a logo and other materials that we used. And I'm going to show you a few of the materials that we developed. Next, please. We did printed mailers to voters and that explained why this was important to the community. And we did, I think, 6 altogether that focused on different aspects of why it was important for New Paltz to have a community preservation fund. And this is just front and back of the one that talks about the importance of clean water. Next, please. We found that compared to 2006, when we did a bond campaign, social media had become so much more important in terms of informing people about the campaign and the reason for the fund. And this is just one example of an ad that we ran on social media. Our committee posted as between September and November, posted every couple of days on the campaign and the purposes of the fund. But as we got really close to election day, we actually paid for some ads on social media, and that proved to be very effective. Next, please. So the New York State Realtors Association came out with their own mailers that they ran one for one with ours, and they were very misleading. This one was the first one, and it was suggesting, that it was going to make New Paltz unaffordable. And so throughout the election season, people were getting our mailers and their mailers, which was pretty confusing for a lot of people. Next, please. So we chose to let voters know that the mailers that they were getting, the opposition mailers they were getting, were coming from people outside the community. And we had people who are well regarded in the community, provide testimonials. And honestly, I think that the campaign that the New York State Realtors Association ran against our initiative really annoyed people. They felt that they really felt intruded upon, that an outside organization was trying to shape our future. And I think it actually worked to our favor ultimately. Next, please. So our referendum was November of 2020. I think Neil mentioned this perhaps, that we passed our resolution with 72% of the vote, which was fantastic. 3 months later, we had worked with Ulster County to put our real estate transfer tax in place because the tax is actually collected by Ulster County and then dispersed back to New Paltz. The exemption, as I mentioned, had increased to reflect the increased home values in Ulster County, but the revenue has exceeded our expectations, and it's kind of like magic to have that revenue rolling in for conservation. Next, please. Neil, I'm going to turn it back to you to kind of wrap up and talk a little bit more about the benefits to New Paltz. And this is just a quote that we really like from Supervisor McKeon from Red Hook in Dutchess County. They passed CPF in the same manner that Warwick did about a decade ago. You're muted.
I'm muted again, so I'm now unmuted. So thanks, Kara. I just want to wrap it up with this quote from Rob McKeon, the supervisor in Red Hook. I'll let you guys read it yourselves, but basically, this kind of mimics what we're saying. This is why. Let's preserve why people are coming to these places. And so, Supervisor McKeon, he was very helpful to us. Passing ours, they passed, and he was responsible for getting it passed in Red Hook in 2011. There weren't a lot of other places where we could go nearby where we could get advice because pretty much there was a de facto moratorium for the last 10 years on getting these things passed because we need approval from the state legislature. I strongly disagree with that. This is something that affects people on a very local level, and we should get to decide on a local level. Let's be democratic about this and let the voters decide. I can understand, maybe not letting town boards or village boards decide, because we often do kind of crazy things. But the voters, they get to decide this with a referendum. And, we kind of present the plan, but they get to decide. And if this is something that you think is a good idea, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your state representatives and encourage them to pass this on a statewide basis. Tell them you want to decide that, let's be democratic about this. They shouldn't be, being heavy-handed and paternalistic and telling us what we can do in our little towns and villages. That's just kind of my thought on that. Thank you for listening. And with that, I want to hand it over to Carly.
I'm going to unmute myself too. Thanks so much, Neil and Kara and Mike. So thank you so much for sticking around with us. My co-presenters have touched on quite a bit of what I'm going to cover, but I think it's important that I just summarize everything and try to lay it out in kind of roadmap style for you all. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the first thing you need to do when trying to pass a community preservation fund, which is to check to see if you've had authority from the state. So as we've heard, currently, in order to have a CPF, your municipality needs to be covered under authorizing legislation. So an example of this is the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act, which authorizes towns and villages in Westchester, Putnam, and Ulster counties to establish, a CPF through a real estate transfer tax. So New Paltz, as we heard, was able to establish their CPF due to this legislation, which was amended in 2019 to include Ulster County. Outside of this, a municipality has to have independent authorization from the state. So what municipalities like Red Hook and Dutchess County and what we heard Warwick had to do was to submit a home rule request and get the governor to actually sign a bill. And there are a couple other municipalities who have gained that independent authority in this way, including Chatham and Columbia County, Fishkill and Dutchess County, and Northeast and Dutchess County. So here's the breakdown. If you have authorization, whether it's under the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act or independently, you can now begin what New Paltz just did and Warwick did a few years ago, which is both the local planning and policy development effort, as well as the campaign effort. So if your municipality is not covered under the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act and doesn't have independent authorization, we really encourage you to start having conversations about CPFs at multiple levels. This is where it all starts. So the foundation of a lot of policy is strong grassroots support. So start talking to your friends and neighbors, your local businesses, community advocates. Start drumming up that support that you can then present to your local and state legislators. So as we heard, you need a champion in Albany in order for the governor to sign a bill to give you authority. So you need to let your legislators know that this is a priority for your community and that you have diverse support behind you. Unfortunately, there's always that possibility that your efforts will garner no legislative interest. So legislators might not be interested in this issue, or they might think that it's not feasible, or they might just simply not support it. So if this is the case, I can tell you it's not the end of the road. There are other available avenues that you can take in the pursuit of conserving more open space, natural and historic resources in your community. And as an aside, I'll also say that you don't have to have authorization to start thinking about putting together some of the pieces that are required for community preservation funds, like Kara and Mike have outlined. So like natural resources, inventories, and your other plans. So it can only help to have these in place when you're in a position to start developing those local laws and the community preservation plan and the campaign. So like I said, If you don't have the ability to do a CPF currently, there are other avenues that you can pursue that Supervisor Sweeten outlined. And there are other programs that will help you start to conserve land or collect funds in an effort to protect the natural and historic resources in your community, which is the ultimate goal. And in the meantime, you can also advocate for the state to give authority to every municipality in the Hudson Valley and beyond. So what does that entail, you ask? Well, there have been legislative efforts to pass a bill that would give all cities and towns across the state the authorization to establish community preservation funds. And the most current bills were introduced by Assemblyman Thiel and Senator Ryan in 2021. So there's a little screenshot of the bill here, just part of this bill text. And so the bill has two parts. The first being a community preservation fund and the second being a community housing fund. So the first part pretty much mirrors the language in the current general municipal law, section 6S, which is the enabling legislation for Dutchess, Putnam, and Westchester. So the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act. The second part is a little bit different. It enables the establish a community housing fund, which would provide financial assistance to first-time home buyers who are residents of the city or town for the purchase of their first home. And it also provides for the physical acquisition and construction of community housing that would be sold to individuals who meet certain income criteria. And the statewide bill also seeks to amend the tax law currently to add an Article 33C, which authorizes cities and towns to impose a real estate transfer tax of up to 2% on any real property or interest over $500. So like Supervisor Sweeten said, this bill would eliminate a lot of the work that municipalities currently face on the front end of their CPF efforts. But I want to say, and I don't want to be discouraging, but I simply want to present the facts as they are currently. What we're seeing right now is that this statewide bill hasn't had and currently doesn't have enough interest to pass. And that's why it's a good idea to start having conversations now, building relationships and common ground with people both inside and outside of your organization or your area or your municipality, communities outside of Orange County or surrounding you. And I'm glad to be speaking to so many strong advocates in Orange County today, but the discussion does need to be broader. So I encourage you to take this discussion public, start sharing information and drumming up support, and always involve your local legislative offices when you can. So we know that this process sounds really confusing and it can be difficult. So there are many places you can turn to when you need some support or information. You can contact statewide organizations like the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy. They've worked on many community preservation fund campaigns over the years, and they might be able to point your municipality in the right direction. We also encourage you to reach out to regional land trusts and conservation organizations like us, like Scenic Hudson. We've been involved in community preservation fund campaigns for many years, and we were actually involved in getting the Hudson Valley Community Preservation passed 15 years ago, if you can believe that. So we have that institutional knowledge, and we can help provide technical support or connect you to people who might know the answers to some of your questions. And then finally, the best way to get information about how to get a community preservation fund in your community is straight from the horse's mouth, from advocates like New Paltz, in New Paltz and Warwick and other communities who have actually done this. And we hope that the information we've given you today will help start framing your thoughts on what's the best choice for your community. And now I'm going to open it up to my co-presenters for any final thoughts that they might have before we move to Q&A. So if anybody has any final words to share, otherwise I will start asking Kate to start fielding some questions.
All right, well, the first thing I want to say is thank you. That was fantastic. And a representative from Senator Martucci's office is on with us and asks everyone to feel free to reach out over there. Check that email and phone number in the chat box, please. And I do want to say I have notes from all of you. So I want to make sure it's not just your state elected officials you have to reach out to. Reach out to your mayor, reach out to the village board, your town board, your city board, have them reach out to someone like Mike, the president from the Orange County Towns, Cities and Villages. Mike has submitted a letter to, I guess it was Skoufis and Metzger last time, the last go, and not all the towns could get on board. So maybe even independently, they could send their support to Mike, but they also should be sending it to our elected officials, their elected officials. The Orange County legislature in our case has passed this unanimously multiple years in a row. So we'd like to say that all of Orange County is very much behind this for all the reasons that the speaker said. It's very objective, and it's the absolute most democratic act. So we want to believe that Orange County legislators do support it. And I suggest anyone on this call reach out to their county legislators if they are not from Orange County. I'm waiting. If anyone else wants to say anything, you can put up a hand. Neil, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, Kara kind of alluded to it, but I'll just kind of say it one more time. Even without the money in place, to start putting the plan together is really useful, because it helps you make your decisions based on data and not just like passion. So someone may really love, and this has already happened to me. People have approached me and said, well, we should preserve this piece of land, and then I'll go to the committee, because the town board doesn't get to decide anymore. It's a committee of volunteers that decide, and they'll be like, oh, what's the score? No, sorry, we're not going to really go forward with that. But which is frustrating for me, but it's also good, right? Because now we're not just going for something because someone's like advocating really strongly. And yes, you can still do that if it's in the plan, but it really kind of helps you put all of the different aspects together. And you can kind of see the total value of a parcel, with historic preservation and water and everything else. So, and, if you don't have all of these different plans in place, that may take a long time, but, even if it does take a long time, I think it helps people realize what they value. And we were lucky enough that, we had all of these different plans in place already in New Paltz. And so we just kind of stapled them together. So there wasn't a lot of controversy. But I do think it made people kind of look at some of the parcels differently when they realized that not only was it valuable for water, it was valuable for historic preservation. And I'll hand it over to Supervisor Sweet.
And I just want to point out that why it's also important to have this fund is you are able to leverage it. I alluded to it in a slide. The federal government, NRCS, and New York State Ag and Markets have very aggressive land preservation plans, programs that will provide either 50% or 75% funding. They focus a lot on farmland, but there'll be other projects as well. So having this makes you really competitive in that effort. If you try to get one of these and then you don't have the money to make your match, you struggle, right? And they don't like that, so it makes you less competitive going forward. So that's another big advantage of this. I
mean, we had the same thing in Red Hook. If you look at how much they've spent versus how much they spent of their own money, the ratio is somewhat similar. It's usually, this really helps you bring in other money. So it's good for the taxpayers.
And that's something, again, that needs to be reminded during the campaign, as well as the tiered prices, or at least that it's not a direct hit on the low and medium income priced houses. These are the scare tactics that the anti-folks say, but it's not. It's also in all the plans, as Mike said earlier. These are the plans that they have approved in the past, your comp plan, your master plan, any open space plan that a municipality may have. Usually, and Mike, maybe you could speak, well, Mike specifically said that Warwick has supported this. And now if we've memorialized that we have supported open space and we want to take care of our drinking water and our farms are valuable to us and they're part of the economy and so forth. As he said the other day, I'm not sure if you said it this time, Mike, this is the mechanism that allows you to adopt the financing to get to the objective in those plans. And that's very important to drive home. Now, Simon Gruber also put in the chat, the New York State has a large act in front of them, the Community Preservation and Land. Am I saying it right, Simon? Nope. Climate Leadership and Community Preservation Act. I think that's it. CLCPA. And they have an over 800-page document that is talking about how to do that. And in several places it is there's citations referencing the Community Preservation Fund. So it's important, Simon is saying in the chat box, that folks consider that and comment there. Carly, I thought I gave you those page numbers. Did I send that to you? Where it is quoted? I don't have that at home. Simon, do you have some page numbers to share with folks if they're able to go there and look at it? Maybe you can provide that in the chat, some page numbers that can help them reference it. And that's always makes it easier to comment on. Anyone have anything to comment on that? Okay. One other thing I wanted to add on and give you a realistic example. When Orange County started this in early the aughts, 2004-ish, and we were denied for reasons already discussed here. One of the reasons that we pushed for it was for open space and farms. And then since then, do we realize that we've had multiple occasions that we really want the clean drinking water. If you look at the city of Newburgh drinking water, there is a lake located in the town of Newburgh, I believe. Could be New Windsor, but I think it's the town of Newburgh still. And that abuts the drinking water. Then the town entertained and passed the Crystal Run large medical office, and that parking lot basically abuts right up to the city's drinking water. However, the city had no jurisdiction because it was in the town, and therefore it was town zoning, and they wanted the rateable, and not too much protection was offered after a lot of attempts and negotiations to try and help protect the drinking water. This is an example of why, if this state law was passed and the city worked on it, they could start amassing that money, and maybe they could have purchased that parcel instead of it building up to a medical park right on their water like New York City does, right? So New York City can do it. Why can't the rest of the state, the villages and the towns be empowered? And in this case, the city. The village of Goshen drinking water, their reservoir is located in the town of Goshen, and now right next to Legoland. So although Legoland did not build up to it, they own all of that property, and I predict, I'll put money down that they will be developing that, if not them, someone else. So again, the village is helpless to try and amass money to buy a parcel to protect their drinking water. And that is one problem I have with the current legislation, is it does not include villages. I've had lots of conversations with sponsors, and they say, well, the villages, you know, are part of the town. And I beg to differ. One of the speakers made reference, and I'll just say it. We all know the town and the villages don't always get along. The villages need to be empowered. I want this legislation passed, but I would like the villages to be able to stand alone to protect their drinking water. If you think about it, the density, historic land use, the density, as Mike and Neil have both demonstrated with their villages and their compared to their villages and town population, the villages are always going to be more dense, greater population in a smaller area. They're not going to have their surface water in that village parcel, the municipal boundary. It's going to be out of it. Where could be different, but they need to be able to have that right to amass the money so that they can buy the parcels surrounding their water. And that's one of my big problems with this bill. So does anyone have anything to say about that before I read? Go ahead.
Sure. So in lieu of that, you can do intermunicipal agreements. We have one with 2 of our villages. We have 3 villages in the town of Warwick, and we have so typically when land gets annexed to a village, it comes in at village zoning and gets a density bonus. So we crafted an intermunicipal agreement with 2 of our villages that the land from a town annexed into the village would come in at town zoning. And then a developer could purchase density up to village zoning. And that money would be then put into land preservation to parcels important to the village, right? So, and in general, that is recreational areas surrounding the village or water resources. The village of Warwick has reservoirs, watershed, and that's a way to do that. Although I would tend to say that villages they're denser, right? And they like to have green belts. I think New Paltz alluded to preserving a piece next to the village. So they do have an incentive to work with the town to get them to purchase land that's valuable to the villages. So it can be done.
Okay, Mike, do you know of any other examples of that, or were you creative enough to do that on your own?
We did it. I don't know if it's done. I'm sure it's done. We just did it because it made sense. The village of Warwick is our largest, and they had a lot of important parcels. They first of all wanted a green belt, and second of all, their reservoirs are in the town. So, you know, they had an incentive, and really historically, land gets annexed into a village and then it's a bonus. It's a bonus for the developer. And usually the villages, you know, back in the day, they thought, oh, great, it's more taxable, rateable value and goes up. But as Neil alluded to, you know, the costs just go up with that. It's really a loser for the village. So this way, the village gets an investment from the developer, and the developer still, you know, can build out, gets a good deal because he now has services from the village, but the village gets a bonus for that, right? They get a payment for that.
Right, but is there what's in it for the town?
Well, the land that's being protected for the village is in the town. So we
So
get
the
more
density,
land, we get more preservation, right? So it's a home run for everybody.
and the preservation then also acts as that necklace you said, or the green belt, the green necklace for the village.
Correct. We've been able to surround the village with a swath of preserved land, and they happen to be mostly all farms, and it's a beautiful entrance to the village.
Right.
I mean, so when you get annexed into the village, you know, that what was town only, where they only pay town or what we call B fund taxes, right? Or not, well, I won't get into it, but if you're annexed into the village, you pay both town and village taxes. And
That is
higher density, you're getting, you know, we're getting more development. So they're paying more taxes because they're building more valuable real estate. So instead of putting a house on a 5-acre lot, they're going to put like an apartment complex on that lot that's worth millions instead of $500,000, right? And so like we still benefit, right? You know, the density is good, right? But people then they can like either ride their bike or go for a walk or maybe get in their car, and within a few minutes they're outside of the village in like this beautiful preserved area with active farms.
right.
Benefits all of us.
It's a de facto transfer development rights, and it works. It can work pretty well.
I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to say. You said you had to go.
I do, and thank you, everybody. I have my email there. If people want to get more information, I'm happy to provide it, whatever you need. And I thank my colleagues. It was great learning about all the great stuff you guys did too. So good luck.
Thank you, Mike, so much.
Last message I leave is persevere in it, because it is a long road, but it's a road that is certainly worth it, and it will preserve your community in a balanced way for the future. And, you know, that's the best hope we have. So everybody have a great night.
Thanks, Mike. Neil, just to go back to what you said, if it's annexed, you're saying that they're paying, that particular use is paying village and town taxes, like not penalized, but just like a typical village resident pays village and town taxes.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I actually live in the village of New Paltz. I pay village taxes and town taxes. You don't pay the full town tax rate because, you know, the building department, the town and village both have a building department. So I don't pay for the town's building department, but my taxes cover the town's police department and the town highway department, a part of the highway department, things like that. So that's like the A and the B that I was talking about. But you still pay taxes. You pay more when you live in a village because you pay village and town taxes, but you get more services, right? You get water and sewer. You often don't get that in the town unless you're in the district, but that's kind of, we're in the weeds here. I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about, I mentioned this is like kind of a let the voters decide, right? With a referendum. And so think about, we wanted to do it. We did ours in 2020 because we have really good turnout in a presidential election year. And so we wanted to capture the vast majority of how the voters felt in our town. So we didn't want to just take a snapshot in an off year. We were pretty confident that if we were able to, if everyone got out and voted, that this is something that people would support. So when you're thinking about when you're going to put this on the ballot, kind of think about it strategically and say, well, when are we going to really capture what the voters in our municipality want? Because this is their chance, and you don't want it to be on some off year election when no one's running for town board and only a small minority of the voters go out, because you're not really then capturing what the sentiment of all the voters are. If it fails, it's gonna be hard to get that traction going again. So make sure when you do get people out there to vote, like you're doing it at the right time.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And a presidential election's the best. A gubernatorial election's pretty good too, because that's when people come out.
Right. That's an excellent point. You don't get lucky all the time, but that's a very good point. Patricia Hennigan is the CAC chairperson for the town of Montgomery. And she wanted us to know that they are working with New York State Hudson River Estuary Program, probably like the folks they worked with when they did their NRI. And they're doing critical environmental areas, which we're doing a critical proposal, which seems that, so that's one way of protecting. And then I heard someone else say that, zoning, I think it was Kara, you said when you broke it down and you looked at everything and you said, if it's zoned, you can turn your attention elsewhere. And I caution that as well, because we're seeing zoning change a lot, especially with the change of boards in Orange County completely. So unfortunately, if it is something of value, you really do want to take care of it. I think a lot of us would say that won't go anywhere. That doesn't make sense. No one would want to live there. But unfortunately, Orange County certainly has development pressure that is agnostic where they want to go and is taking over municipal boards and changing zoning in a heartbeat. So that's not always a way that will work for us at this point. So I just wanted to bring that up because when I heard you say it, I said, oh, that's not something that would help with Orange County. And we can't depend on it because things are changing. Simon Gruber also talked about this draft scoping document. If you want to reach out to him, he put his name in the chat, but you could always reach out to me if you're interested. And I too can send you out some information. I could even try and put some of that on our website if you'd like. And one more thing that I would like to say is I made the joke in the invitation, it's 10 years at least that it's been trying to pass the Community Preservation Fund, and they can never get enough support. As I believe Carly said, there's just not enough people there. So I will say I've talked to the people outside Albany, they're interested. We know Long Island's interested. Some people in Erie County are interested, but clearly we all have friends and family in different locations around the state, upstate, downstate. Call them, talk to them. It's good for everyone. So it's so important to get everyone on board, to call everyone and say, this works for everyone. And again, the passive recreation is just a plus for everyone, that the trails that can be allowed on these properties. So you get your water preservation, your farms, you're great for your economy, your open space, your historic, your cultural values, and then throw on the recreation that get to walk on some beautiful properties like we saw in the slides tonight. But I think I've gotten my questions answered in my comments. Please, I'd love to hear from other folks. Maybe while they're thinking, Carly, if you could please tell me those 3 or 4 communities in Dutchess that you rattled off. When you
Yeah.
get it, or you could put it, go ahead.
Yeah, I will throw it in the chat there. And that you also brought up a point that I wanted to expand on. With the COVID-19 pandemic that we've been seeing a lot more use of our outdoor recreational spaces. So much so that some of them are getting overwhelmed. And
Yes.
there's infrastructural issues that could be addressed with funding for preserving open space and natural resources. So it's just another reason to think about preserving the land in your community, because not only is there development pressure that we're seeing with COVID, but there's also foot pressure as well.
You know, and now that you say that, last year there was an Earth Day Advocacy Day put on by, I will forget which group, but they had about a dozen bills, and they didn't have the Community Preservation Fund, but they did have the 30 by 30 bill, and it is up again. It is basically stating, and it is sponsored by Senator Todd Kaminsky from Long Island, who didn't really seem to care about the Community Preservation Fund every time I reached out to him. But he has this bill that to save 30% of open space by 2030. Clearly, this helps that. Clearly. And the Environmental Protection Fund, nope. I forget what bill it's called, but statewide, I believe that Cuomo was pushing some initiative. Again, more parks, because even then they were trying to expand it. Then COVID, and yes, a lot of our parks need to be not capital improvements, but additional parks because they are so overused. Was someone trying to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I think Neil mentioned that, you know, protecting open space can really enhance a community's climate resilience. Either forested areas or wetlands that can absorb flood water is really valuable in terms of thinking about climate. And I think that recreation is so important to people's mental health, but that these protected areas are really important to community health.
And part of those state incentivized programs, the Climate Smart Community and the Clean Energy Communities, they want you to do these actions. So if you did this is, as Kara said, building resiliency, and that's what they want to see. And you're getting so many ancillary benefits from this, like we talked about. The one other thing, Kara, that you said earlier on a slide, which really, you said $180,000 is what you can get annually, right?
That was what we projected based on
Estimated.
past sales. Yeah.
Right. Which really isn't a lot. If you could leverage that 50%, you know, it's really not a lot that you're starting to buy, but then you get as far as Warwick and it starts building and it makes sense. But what you did say was 1,572, I believe, parcels, not acres, you know, where you buy 50 at a time, 20 something, 100 and something. Parcels is what you said, identified as important, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not necessary, but important. That is a huge amount of transactions. And you need to start this as soon as possible. One of my biggest regrets, having worked on this since 2004, how much money we would have. And no one understands how great of opportunity this is, in my neck of the woods, at least, because it was basically flat, you know, no at the door. So.
Well, you know, Kate, I think I've been thinking since we spoke last week about the bill statewide. And I think that it's really important that the New York State Realtors Association be talked to, because I believe that they're probably an important opponent to the statewide bill. And yet, the evidence is that communities that have CPF, it only enhances land values. It only increases the value of homes, which you would think the real estate community would embrace. So it's really time to, figure out why they have this point of view on this initiative. Because if they continue to oppose it, they're important in Albany. They're influential, and if they could be brought around on this to see how it benefits them, I think it would go a long way towards making it possible to have a statewide program.
I mean, when we were doing our campaign in 2020, the New York State Realtors was like, "Oh, this is going to really hurt home values in New Paltz." I have not seen that in the last 2 years. If anything, home values are going up even faster, and we're not even preserving land, but people are paying the tax. Yes, it's COVID, but it hasn't affected. People aren't saying, "Oh, well, I'm not going to move to New Paltz because I have to pay that real estate transfer tax." At least not that we've seen.
No, and Red Hook reports the same thing, that their realtors have come around to understand that it's actually a benefit to their business.
And in terms of messaging on the front end, when trying to get this passed, it's helpful to frame it as this is an investment in the community that people want to live in. And this was said previously in the presentation, but the money is going towards keeping the community how people like it, how people want to move to. So in New Paltz, for example, people move there because of the open space and the pastoral views, things like that. This fund that they're contributing to is contributing to maintaining that.
Right. It's like the supervisor from Red Hook, the insurance of the quality of life in the future will be guaranteed because of all these things. And then the appeal to move here will keep your home values. I would say, to Kara's point, it's quality versus quantity for the real estate board. They'll have quality homes at good, dependable, reliable prices, but they won't have the quantity of the apartment complex. Maybe instead of, well, I won't say the apartment complex, but they don't have the spread out sprawl where they can get the numbers up. I guess that's the way they're looking at it, right?
Well,
I'm sorry, Neil.
I don't think we really understand how they look at it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that.
It was explained to us that anything that is even perceived as making it harder to sell a house without fully just the immediate reaction is like, yeah, I think that's just going to make it harder. So people don't like change, I think, right? And I think after they've experienced like the agents in Red Hook, they're now advocates for it. I'm hoping that over time the agents in New Paltz will say, yeah, I did help, but change I think is hard for everyone.
That's true. It's interesting because in the state of Massachusetts, there are literally hundreds of communities that have CPFs and have had them for years. And their model, I don't know whether it's uniform, but does include an affordable housing component. And I think as does the bill that Carly was talking about. And I think that makes a lot of sense because then there's some, what's the word I want, but it sort of balances out the fact that home prices might increase somewhat from the real estate transfer tax, but if you can also use that money towards affordable housing, then you've got a much more balanced approach. And so I think it makes sense. And I think we should look at the models that are being used in Massachusetts.
I'll say, like we've said it, right? But this does increase the value of homes. Right? So it makes your town a more desirable place to live. So people want to live there. They pay more for the houses. So, yes, right? It does actually affect the affordability of homes. So having the transfer tax in there and some of it going to to helping people buy homes is good. But just because it doesn't, it shouldn't be that because you can't afford a nice house, you don't get to live in a nice place, right?
Right.
And so we want people to want to live here. And part of doing that is making it a nicer place to live. Yes, that increases home values, but there should also be people who need help buying those homes should be helped out. But it doesn't, we don't want to make it a lousy place to live. The goal shouldn't be making it a horrible place so everyone can afford to live there. That's not how you really, want to live the rest of your life, right? So should we just destroy all the open space and then the housing values go down? That's not the answer, right?
We're also in the village of Goshen, back to the zoning that you mentioned, to your point, 174 townhouses right on the Heritage Trail, right there. I think there's going to be trail users who are going to be upset about that, right? But that's your density that would like to use some sort of passive recreation, whether it's a trail, whether it's a trail, functional now linear rail trail, or a trail in the future on one of these areas. And back to that necklace idea, or at least some sort of green, whatever you want to call the green belt, the necklace. I also want to say, I want to make it funny about Massachusetts because they're the leaders in roundabouts, traffic circles too, but New York, it's taken that long for them to follow them in that lead too. We know they're the leader in healthcare and so forth. But I want to make a joke that the other day I saw an advertisement for a new home, and in their laundry room, they had a granite countertop, their laundry room. Now that probably cost around $800 or more. And that's exactly the price that Kara said that a home would pay one time, $800 to live in this wonderful community. And the realtors, to me, have to have those basics, that they have to have the granite, they have to have the 2.5 bath, they have to have the master suite and this. And until the nearby trail or the nearby open space and the preserved farm, and until that becomes up there with granite, that $800, they're going to say, no, that's not worth it. We'd rather give them this and sell this. It's that hard change of culture, change of mindset.
Well, I think people have really discovered the out of doors in a big way due to the pandemic, and I don't think people are going back inside. I really don't. I think people have really come to appreciate the value of open space near home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just
That's
wanted to
right.
mention, I dropped the information for the Massachusetts Community Preservation Coalition. So if
Thank
people
you.
are interested in seeing what they're doing over there, check out that website.
Oh, so great. Good things happening from that state. All right. So anyone else? We can talk about this all night. So Kara, while people are finishing their thoughts, if they're going to say anything, do you want to revisit that? Either that conversation we had last week about the real estate board? You said you were going to maybe talk to a colleague, and then we did a 180 and said maybe we shouldn't. You could think about it, you could sleep on it, but
no, I'm probably not going to do that outreach, but I think that our conservation organizations who work in Albany are well positioned to have those conversations. So Carly, I'm encouraging conservation organizations to take the lead on trying to make that contact.
mm-hmm.
We're in discussions right now are the conservation organizations to see how we can best support communities across the state with community preservation fund efforts.
Yes, I really appreciate all that the conservation organizations have done to make this possible and continue to the work you continue to do.
Yes, and we have Jeremy Schneider from Orange County Land Trust on as well. So hopefully he can work some magic there. All right, all. Unless there's anything else to say.
Kate, thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you
Really
for
appreciate
coming.
it. Yeah.
It's really important. Again, if any of the folks remaining are Orange County folks, please reach out to me. We have a group. We have several people on right now. Kate Amati, Tracy Shu from the Preservation Collective in Chester, that work with us, work with the Climate Smart, Orange County Climate Smart Community Open Space Land Use and Agricultural Task Force. And, you know, we try and see what we could do to save open space. So reach out if you want to get involved, and reach out to your elected officials. If you need any information, please call us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a
Great.
wonderful night.
Thank you, Kate.